Welcome. You are listening to a special episode of TLR's podcast. In this series, we are talking to the reviewers who brought you TLR's 55 most reread books. Each episode breaks down the list into specific favorites for that reviewer. You can find more reviews and best of lists on thelesbianreview.com. Today I'm joined by Valden Bush, reviewer at TLR. Today we're talking about her selection for TLR's 55 rereads. Okay, so let's just start with the question, why reread books? What is it that attracts you to certain books and not others?
I think it's the emotion that the book brings out inside me, that you go to read a book, and I don't tend to read single books, they tend to be series, because if I get into an atmosphere, an emotion, I want to keep going. So if I'm in a world, for science fiction, for example, I want to keep going in that world. And I differ from a lot of science fiction readers. They can tell you the colour of people's clothes, the bolts that are on a door frame. They can tell you the specialisation of the science and the whatever. I don't care really about that, because I'm actually in there for the emotion. Does that sound bit strange? So you could say to me, so what about the craft in the Caffin and Fletcher Delancey? And I'd say it's big. I don't have, or I'm not interested in the stuff. As long as it sounds good, it works for me. But I love the way authors get the emotion between the players, the characters that are in the book. And series often have the same setting, but different people in it. So it carries on often the feelings and the emotions that you had in the first volume. But it's actually interesting. I was talking to somebody saying I only reread series, and they said, did you know that if you... and I'd actually heard one of the publishers say that if you have a trilogy, the first book sells, say, 100, the second book will only sell 50, and the third book will only sell 25. So you think somebody's doing a series with 5 books in it. Why aren't people reading the rest of them like me?
I must confess, I'm one of those people that don't generally read through a series. I will very rarely read beyond book 1. And it's not that I don't like series books, and I totally get what you mean by, you get really invested in the world and you get really invested in the characters. I've never been able to figure out why I just don't. I generally don't. I've got some exceptions, but by and large, I'm not a series reader.
You asked us for a list. I gave you a list, but to be frank, if you added all of Radclyffe's series, Jane Fletcher's series, and a numerous other authors' series, they could go on my list as well, because they're when you haven't got that much money, you save up for books. So I save up for my series, and they're my Christmas presents. And I reread them over and over and over again.
Yep. Lesfic is particularly expensive as well in terms of the fictional world. So I totally get it. Okay, so let's start with Fated Love by Radclyffe, one of the few books that are not part of a series that you've put on your list. For those interested, it is available in audiobook, narrated by the fabulous Abby Craden.
Yes, it is, and the audiobook is, I would say, is as good as the written word. It's really nicely done. I have both. She said, I have a thing about Quinn Maguire. The story basically is the two main protagonists, Quinn and Honor. Quinn is a surgeon with a past who's going to work in an ER that's headed up by Honor, and who also has a past. I don't want to give anything away here, so I'm trying to be careful. And it's about how they meet, how they get together, in terms of working together, and what happens. And they are a typical Radclyffe. One is as dark as the other is light, so they're really contrasting. And to me, it's a really emotional story.
Fated Love is one of those Radclyffe classics that really bring all the feelings to the surface. I so relate to the restlessness, the unhappiness, that sort of I can't sleep properly, I need to be doing something all the time of Quinn Maguire. I do, because I completely was like that before I met Tomorrow. So, like, I completely get it. Quinn was a sexy as hell doctor, though, as well.
Yes, well, I didn't like to say that. Hot.
Well, I mean, it's Radclyffe. There's going to be hot characters. It just is, you know? It's like a fact of life.
No, I'm reading the latest in her Honor series, Cost of Honor, and I mean, she still does it. She puts in a few pages, and I'm whoa. I'm just
completely true.
I'm just a sucker.
Well, there's a reason Radclyffe is such a giant in the industry, you know.
Exactly. So,
but that brings us to another one of hers that's also on your list and on my list, which is Tomorrow's Promise. Also standalone, but it also has the same kind of dark and broody, restless character, which I just fall in love with.
Yes, the same thing. I love it because of Tanner Whitley, who is the dark and broody and going off and trying to run away from her life with drink and drugs. But I really love Adrienne Pierce because she's got uniform on. And I'm a sucker for uniforms, as you know. But the whole story relates with me. I've not me personally, but I've been involved in dealing with illness of the type that Adrienne Pierce has had. So I can relate to all of that really well. When you are in that situation, how you hang on to things that you used to live and realise that they don't work anymore. And life is a before cancer and after cancer. And there's a real change there, and that's what Adrienne Pierce is going through, that change. So it's a lovely story, and of course, if you read the other series, the Tanner Whitley and Adrienne come into the Honor series, and there's crossovers which Radclyffe does all the time, which is good.
Which is awesome. I feel like Radclyffe needs like a giant, you know, in the L Word, Alice's links, the sort of diagram of everybody who slept with everybody. That, but with Radclyffe's books, just in terms of like this character appears in this book and this book and this book, and because it's a whole world, hey.
You're in Provincetown and suddenly Dell from the Justice series appears. So she crossed over in the series, and now I'm reading about Dell again, and I'm in the Honor series.
I think it's awesome. I love it. I want somebody to create that chart for sure.
I bet your listeners will hear this, and somebody will appear with one.
That'd be awesome.
One of the spreadsheet queens.
That's true, hey?
Which isn't me, for sure.
Okay, so on your list is also Protector of the Realm by Gunbrook. So this is one of those series as you're talking about, right?
Yeah. It was one of the early books I read, because I got into lesfic through the Caffernan and Fletcher Delancey's series, and then I looked around for something else to read and ended up with Gunbrook. I would say that she's science fiction light.
Okay.
In terms of, it's a good science fiction story, but again, we're not interested in how you get from A to B in what kind of, in great detail, But there is a sense of otherworldliness and a sense of emotion between names. The captain of the ship, Jessalon, and Kellen, and how they relate to each other. And then through the stories, other strong women come in each of the 4 episodes of the series. And I just love that sense of adventure. I know it's science fiction, but it is really adventure about women going off and doing things. I don't know whether you want me just to summarise the story. Basically, it's the captain of a starship who eventually takes captive a woman and a small boy, and it transpires that the woman is something that is a surprise, and the small boy is a surprise as well. And it's the story of the worlds that are involved in that sort of capturing, and what the wheres and the wherefores. I'm trying not to give away any of the story, but it's a classic. I think it's an older book, although the last one is fairly recent. The first one is one of her early books, and I think, what's available in science fiction now is completely different to what was available 10, 15 years ago, and I think a good on her for writing it, for one thing, but the world, she has the ability. I was talking to, it sounds like I'm name dropping. Well, I suppose I am. I was talking to a couple of authors because I'm trying to write, about what you put into a science fiction world in terms of content. How do you make that world believable? And they, I'll say who they were. They were Jane Fletcher and Bray Willow. So they're both write really well. And they were saying about how you need to write enough. Don't overwrite your world, because people won't be interested in too much information, but you need enough to make your world real. And I think Gumbook did that. She had that ability. Does that make sense?
It does. You don't want to overwhelm the reader with too many facts that aren't important to the story, but you want to world build enough that they feel like they're there.
Exactly. And, there's a whole raft of questions. If you go to write something science fiction, you suddenly start to say, oh my God, how do I deal with time? What's a day if you haven't got the sun going round?
Well, this is the exact sort of thing that these amazing authors manage to tackle and do well enough that it seems seamless when you're reading it. Exactly.
And that's why some of these series, I think, are particularly good, because the authors have done that.
When you're not writing a contemporary novel, world building becomes an interesting challenge, I think, for anybody, including the next book, which is Golden Seal by Jill McKnight. She may write it in this world, but now there's all sorts of werewolf lore and things that have to go into it.
Yes, and I love her intersection between the real world and the Wolven world. I don't do wolves and paranormals and vampires and what have you, but a number of people suggested I ought to read it because it's got Jill McKnight's got a lovely sense of humour, and that was part of it. But the emotion involved she gets you involved in the main characters, and then just at the point where you're thinking, oh my God, you're laughing. And I don't know how she does it, but I was not inclined to think I'd enjoy it, but I really, really enjoyed the first in the series. Is that Golden Seal? I can't remember.
It is Golden
But
Seal.
it's the next one, I think.
Amber Eye.
Amber Eye. Is that the one with the
little dog.
Yes, and the woman who's her assistant, and the office politics where
the chair stealing
and the stapler.
Yes. This is one of those rare series that I actually read the whole series and devoured it. And I will go back and reread the whole series because I actually loved every book was individual and interesting, and the main characters were so different from one another. What I loved about her is each pairing was so perfect for each other. So they weren't the same. The thing about somebody like Rad, I love Rad, but you know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get the strong, butch, broody character, and then the sort of more femme, lighter character generally, and they're going to pair up. And that's great. And I love Rad for it because I know exactly what I'm going to get. With these books, with McKnight, I had no idea what I was going to get, and every book was a delightful and different read.
It's exactly right. And there's the one with the pink camper van, the girl and the house living with the is it her uncle or grandfather?
I think it was her uncle. Yeah.
Uncle.
Yeah.
And the whole of that story, again, you kept saying to yourself, I don't believe that. Whoa! And it was just amazing. You know, I've just read, she started on a new trip with witches in the UK. And of course I don't read witches either. Barrage, yeah. And oh my God, I have been laughing and laughing and laughing. It's a very, very, very good read. So, and I sent her an email and said, are you going to do any more? And she said, number 2's in production. So it's wonderful.
No, Jill's fantastic. She's one of the few authors I've actually done 2 different books of hers as book club reads because she just writes across the spectrum. Nothing from her is ever the same as the thing before. Yeah, and she's got a wicked sense of humor. I do love that about her. So, but the Garul series, which is on the list, is a great take on a contemporary sort of urban fiction werewolf type thing, but there's definitely romance in every single book.
I can't remember where it's set. It's somewhere like Oregon.
I have no idea where, but it's set in Little Dip.
Little Dip, and you can smell the woods. You know,
yes.
Her writing is such that, and the river that runs through there. I was reading it in the winter, but you could really find yourself wanting to swim in it.
I completely agree. When she talks about the claw marks on the trees, or the smell of the earth, or the sounds of the wolves in the forest, you feel like you're there. She just is a magnificent author. Completely agree. Thank you for being an awesome listener and supporting Tilt, the channel that brings you all the podcasts you want to hear. You're listening to Tilt. Find more podcasts on thelesbiantalkshow.com. Okay, so your next book on the list is Beowulf for Cretans by Anne McMahon.
Yes, I'm an Anne McMahon fan. I've got my Christmas money earmarked already for the latest one that's come out, and I'm not read the one before because I'm saving them to read them together. Beowulf for Cretans. It's quite funny because I didn't know what a cretin was, but in English I think it's a cretin.
Right.
It quite confused me somewhat, and I didn't read it for ages because I didn't like the title, and I kept thinking there's something wrong with it. And then I read it, and again, it is a romance, but there's so much more in it. It's funny. There's 2 strong women, but there's this side cast of characters that she's just so clever at writing about. I particularly liked. I was just trying to remember the professors now. I'm looking on my piece of paper. Abby's brother, and Abby does things that will take you askance. And if I said to you, I don't want to give the story away, but if I said to you, she decided to go and visit Grace, and how she got there, and you think, oh, that's stupid. Nobody would ever do that. But Anne McMahon takes you on her journey, and you could see why she did it and why she ended up where she ended up. And it is just priceless. From a lot of the authors that I've read, I really admire her writing because she takes you on a journey but makes comment, which you don't realise she's doing, but makes comment about the things that she sees wrong within the American system, whether it's the education system, the political system, or whatever. And her word choice is, I wish I'd got that kind of word choice. Do you know what I mean?
She's very specific.
And she says things, and you feel like you could lift numerous sentences out of her book because they are clever.
McMahon is for sure a deep thinker.
Yeah, very much so. But it doesn't mean that her books are boring. Are you going to talk about the series? Because then I'll talk about the series next.
Yes, we'll go on to the series next.
Jericho is just... I can't tell you. I read Jericho and I got to the end of it and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to read now. I want more. I'm there. I'm with them all. And I then then I had the audiobook. So I read the audiobook as well. But then eventually I've read the series and the audio. I've then listened to the audiobook and I've reread, and it is just... Her characters are clever. The people who surround... The story really settles around... I'm just trying to remember the names of people. I'm not very good at names. Sid the librarian, and Maddie. And the people around them. And it is very... I suspect it's very American in terms of the organisation of things and the political statements. But I don't care. I love it. It's like you could actually take it as a piece of history of a bit of America in my English viewpoint. There's a girl in there called Norma Jean Fremantle, who is in all 3 volumes, who's a complete disaster at the start, and eventually, I don't want to give away the story, but she is absolutely delightful, and Anne gets her beautifully, and you follow her with such interest, and she does things that you think, oh no, you know, those sort of things a young girl will do wrong. She does them, and it is delightful.
There's how many books in the Jericho series? 3, hey?
Yeah. I want more. It's you really are. If you like good characterization and a lovely story of a community. I mean, one of the stories has got, I don't know my cars, so I have no idea what a red Camaro is, but this car that has been caught in a storm, and parts of it are throughout the community, and they're looking for parts of it because it's been taken apart. And it's just this wonderful story about people, and the red Camaro takes up half the story, really. It's wonderful.
McMahon is also one of these legends in the industry for a reason. All right, so let's go on to In the Distance, There Is Light by Harper Bliss. So this is one of those standalones, or is this part of the series as well?
No, this was a standalone. There's obviously she's written a lot of series, which I've read and reread, as you do. In my view, it's the best book she's written. It's still, with all the books she's written now, I still think it's the best book she's written. It's a story, and she's tackled something that people would perhaps think would be difficult. A woman, her husband dies, and it's the relationship between the woman and her husband's mother. So they're both grieving and how they deal with it. And it is very emotional, very carefully written. I enjoyed the characters and what happened. I'm trying not to say anything because I think if you read it, you will get into it. But a lot of Harper Bliss's books are strong on story and a little less on character. And this is really strong, in my view, on character, and that the story is just allowed to run itself. So it's in my humble opinion, it's really just well written.
So it's more emotive then, because people are more drawn to characters.
And it is a difficult subject, the relationship between, obviously, a wife and a mother, and how that progresses. I think it was beautifully done, and I like rereading it, as you obviously guessed.
That's great. Let's talk about Lethal Affairs. Now, this is a whole different kind of a series to the emotional stuff we've just been talking about. This is a very action-based series.
Yes, in my youth, obviously, as you're aware, I didn't find lesfic till a few years ago, and I'm positively ancient. So that means that I spent a lot of my life not reading lesfic. I'm reading science fiction and adventure stories and thrillers. That was my total life. But I started reading adventure stories, and I was brought up on Alistair MacLean, Desmond Bagley, Hammond McInnes. There are lots of Neville Shute. They were all adventure story writers in the 60s and 70s. 19, not 18. Sorry.
You're not quite that old, hey?
Quite. But, and so from the age of, 10 or 11, my parents let me read adventure stories. And they're my silent love. I go back to them. But they were always men doing it, and not women. It was the problem.
Right. I completely agree. And this is what's so wonderful about this series, or pretty much anything that Kim Baldwin writes, is that there's this kick-ass woman doing stuff. It's fantastic.
And I don't think that there's too much difference in our ages, so I wonder whether she was a Desmond Bagley reader or a Neville Shute reader in her youth. But I've got every single book that Kim Baldwin's written, and that series I just love because it's just slightly not real, in that there's this place that trains these women to do wonderful things.
It's like a spy school.
Yes, exactly, and they have names
awesome.
like Shield and Lynx and I don't know. It's just wonderful. So, can you tell I sound about 15 again?
Oh no, I completely agree. And Lethal Affairs is the first one, hey, in the series.
Yeah, yes, it's she's produced 2 on audiobook, Lethal Affairs and Gemini Deception. And I've been waiting for the rest of them because the audiobooks of those 2 are really well done.
Totally agree. Those are the only 2 in the series I've consumed because they're on audiobook, and they're both stunning.
There's a really good characters in them. The story behind them is good. The adventure element is out of this world, and you end up in her books, there's people after other people, and you're in there being chased or chasing or whatever. It is
completely shootouts, car chases, explosions, you name it. This is what you're going to get. It's fabulous.
I know, it's lovely. I'm obviously an adventurer at heart.
I'm right there with you. Hey, I'm a couch adventurer.
Yes, yeah, that's about right. No, I'm a real life adventurer.
And let's talk about your final one, which I know you're going to fangirl the hardest over, which is the Kafanen.
Well, yes, I came across the Kafanen a few years ago as a science fiction reader. I read a lot of space opera type books with lots of, in fact, in the science fiction world, a lot of the guys write about kick-ass women, which is quite a nice thing to do. But somebody recommended on one of the sites, read the Kafanen. So I did. And I thought, this has got women in it. And the women are in charge. And the women are making decisions. And, oh my God, and it was just... So I've sort of really loved the whole of the series. I've followed Fletcher Delancey has created a world full of empaths. And they're, what's the word I'm looking for? They're gender fluid. So they could be male or female when they start their lives. Their positions are, most of the main positions are held by women, and they have to fight to hang on to them. There's a spaceship with a captain who's got a woman and a relationship with a woman. There's all the things you could think of that make you, the use of empathy in terms of this country of empaths has to use it to save themselves. So they use it as a weapon. So there's a lot of questions you're asked, but in the writing, Fletcher manages to give you A, good story, B, a good world, and C, adventure. And she sort of approaches all sorts of things. So one of the books, she doesn't step back from difficult things. One of the books is about an asexual member of the population and the problems that they have. And that is really, really well done. And she doesn't sort of disappear and hide behind really important statements. That makes it sound as if her books are a whole load of political humdrum, but they're not. They're science fiction books. And she's got a wide audience, both male and female. So her books aren't necessarily totally a lesbic audience, although the bulk of them are. But I know if you speak to your science fiction reviewers, they will all mention the Chronicles of Ulysses as an important set of books to read. I mean, I think we're waiting for 9 or 10. So, and I just wait for the next one to come out all the while. So they're my highlights.
In fact, there's such a popular series that there's a fan group on Facebook where you guys do like buddy reads and things.
Yes, they're we're rereading the whole series at the moment, thinking that if we reread the series before, we should be just about in time for the next book to come out, which we tend to do a lot. But people pick up things that they didn't see last time they looked at the book.
I think that covers all 9 of your rereads. Is that, well, 9 being the first in multiple series?
As I said to you before we started, next time I'm only going to have a list of 1.
One series of like 50 books.
That would work.
Valden, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
I'm at valdenbush.com. I have a website, and I'm on Twitter, and my handle's Valden Bush. And on Facebook, Valden Bush. Happy to discuss series with anybody. I love to find other people who are interested.
Valden's also somebody good to follow because she gets involved with some of the UK events that are, happening that are book related.
I usually tweet and Facebook about them anyway, so it's good.
Thank you for tuning into the special TLR podcast series, where we have been chatting about our favourite rereads. To support the work TLR and Tilt do, please make sure to use our buy links for Amazon, or become a patron. Using our buy links gives us a small commission on purchases you make on Amazon within 24 hours of clicking the link. Becoming a patron means you get exclusive content. Go to patreon.com/thelesbianreview for more.